welcome to MedCity News' Pivot Podcast. I am Arundhati Parmar, your host. Health systems are under tremendous pressure to deliver quality care while increasing efficiency and improving their bottom lines. One company that believes it can help cash-strapped health systems cut their costs and improve their operational efficiency by leveraging technology is Smarter Technologies. So today, I'm speaking with Jeremy Delinsky, CEO of Smarter Technologies, about the company's efforts in clinical documentation improvement and revenue cycle management. This episode is sponsored by Smarter Technologies. Hello and welcome, Jeremy, to the MedCity Pivot Podcast.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too. Jeremy, it's really nice to have you on this specific episode because we're talking about transforming, hospital operations. And, you run a company that is all about making hospitals operate more efficiently and, dare I say, more profitably. So let's sort of begin there. Smarter Technologies came into being when three companies, Access Healthcare, Thoughtful AI, and Smarter DX was acquired and put together by private equity firm New Modern Capital, and then you came on as CEO. Each of these companies has its own unique offerings. So can you briefly elaborate on each
Yeah,
of those?
sure. So the reason we brought these three companies together is that we're really focused on doing two primary things. Number one is getting the invoice right for what happens in admission or a patient encounter. And to get that right is fundamentally an act of medical documentation where you need to have it right the first time if you're going to get paid appropriately
Mm-hmm.
downstream. And then the second thing is then if you get it right, how do you then collect at the lowest cost, at the highest quality with the least friction? And so these three platform companies give us those capabilities. So Smarter DX is a pre-bill CDI company
Mm-hmm.
that focuses on that accuracy of medical documentation. Thoughtful AI is an agentic AI platform that automates several use cases in the revenue cycle and automates maybe up to 70% of the work, and then the super talented experienced expert workforce at Access Healthcare helps train the virtual agents that Thoughtful has developed. But also, healthcare is really complicated, and for a variety of reasons related to compliance or just, we're not there yet on the ability to automate certain tasks. You need to still have people in the loop, right?
Mm-hmm.
To assess the overall performance of the system and to fulfill the work when the technology itself can't. And that was the theory of why these three companies came together.
So I wanted to ask a follow-up. You talked about having humans in the loop. I understand that especially as we ramp up our use of artificial intelligence, you want to make sure that, the I's are being dotted and the T's are being crossed and all of that. But if we still have people in the mix, then where is the cost efficiencies coming from?
Well, if you have a lot fewer, if you can automate 70% of the work, then that's a massive savings, right?
Okay.
And sometimes what people are doing, they've already offshored a lot and they're asking the question like, well, now what do I do in the revenue cycle? I've been offshoring for years, but I have a cost takeout mandate in RCM. What do I do?
Right.
And so, and then some organizations haven't even done that, right? Where there's still, work that they've kept onshore because they felt like that's important to do either from a brand perspective or from, they're maybe a large employer. And I think that the way that we can help is, we don't want to take over the end-to-end revenue cycle. We want to meet our customers and health systems where they are, where they might
Mm-hmm.
need help with, you know, AR management, but they don't need help with prior auth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what we think it's our job to do is to be extenders of our clients. And then when we do the work for them, it is a lot less expensive than their alternatives on the market. And because so much of it is automated, it's very high quality, right? Because virtual agents don't make the same kind of mistakes that people do.
Sure.
And the turnaround time is really fast, right? You don't have to deal with sort of staffing and shift work,
Mm-hmm.
work can just magically get done or near magically get done as it flows into a queue, or it just gets burned down kind of the next day because you spin up to as much capacity as you need. Whereas like getting the staffing right has
Mm-hmm.
been a very specific
Challenging.
focus
Mm-hmm.
within RCM for a very long time. And the ability to move away from that is a huge unlock in terms of how you can also start getting some costs out of the system.
So you mentioned clinical documentation, CDI, clinical
Yeah.
documentation improvement, and that has been a challenging area for hospitals and health systems, and they are now prioritizing this. Can you explain sort of why they're prioritizing it so much? Is it purely from a reimbursement perspective, and what role smarter technologies plays?
Yeah. I mean, I think that first of all, everybody wants medical records to be accurate, right?
Hmm.
And that's really important for safety, among other things. But there is a very challenging reimbursement environment right now. So, in the last 2 decades, every American's health information became digital,
Right.
and how we pay for healthcare hasn't fundamentally changed. And I'm
Hmm.
not talking about, fee for service or value-based care. Yes, there have been lots of successful examples of VBC, but I'm talking about the underlying chassis, the transactions that make it all work.
Hmm.
And so what payers have been focused on, and look, rightly so, like if you read, the CMS Medicare Managed Care Manual, like we should only be paying for care that's medically necessary as a society, right?
Right.
And but what payers have been doing is using this influx of availability of clinical data in a way where they want to get for certain kinds of care those records before they will make payment. And
Hmm.
that is something like like of all sort of denials, and this isn't considered a final denial usually, but a huge volume of medical records requests so so that they can even adjudicate the claim.
Hmm.
And then medical necessity has become a significant focus on of the payment integrity industry, right?
Hmm.
So the payment integrity industry started as like, hey, are you billing the right insurance company, essentially, like
Right.
COB, subrogation, and then it started to get into sort of like claim validation itself and auditing. They have they're a few years ahead leveraging medical data, right? So they are requesting charts to, after payment has already been made, reevaluate whether those
Hmm.
payments were in fact for medically necessary care. So
Right.
if you're a health system right now, you are dealing with this every single day, just a ton of requests for documentation.
Right.
And sort of once the chart, you know 6 months after the fact, you can't open the chart again, right? Like
Right.
it's, like if you don't capture at the time of the service what really happened there, you've really missed an opportunity. And so that is why we've chosen to focus there, because
Hmm.
it's such a pain point
Right.
with, very few guardrails on that business process in any way.
And then the whole idea of what is medically necessary, is it, it's so subjective, right? It might differ from, provider to provider and even payer to payer. I think I'm curious to hear your opinion on it. I had pain in my right foot for the longest time and I didn't know what it was. So I thought maybe I twisted an ankle or something. At first, they did an x ray, then they did an ultrasound, and then finally they did an MRI to figure out what it was. Now I'm guessing they went for the X-ray because that's the cheapest modality to see what's happening, right? But then they did all these additional things to ultimately go for the most expensive way to figure out what was truly wrong. So I don't know who was right there. Was the provider right in going through these additional steps because they didn't want pushback from the payer, or was it the person wasn't experienced enough to realize that, okay, maybe MRI is the way to go? I don't know. I have questions
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, no, like, look, I think that, when it comes to imaging, people do want to start with the lowest cost and to see whether additional, more expensive imaging is necessary. And I think that, that's been behavior that's been very much trained through the
Right,
prior authorization process
right,
over many years, right? And,
right,
I think that there is a sense you've got to sort of exhaust the less expensive options before you step into a more expensive option. And in many ways, that's like a good thing, right? In terms of spending our healthcare dollars well, but I think you're getting at, this idea of medical necessity. I would say that, a lot of the time, if the documentation is clear, there's no controversy.
Makes sense.
There is controversy even when the documentation is clear in a subset of medical necessity reviews where there might be some gray area in clinical guidelines, right? Where, both the payer and the provider are using, whether it's Milliman or Interqual, and that becomes sort of the focus of the battle, right? Where you get the clinical advisors, the physician advisors on the phone for a peer to peer with the health plan.
Hmm.
And, my experience kind of witnessing that process evolve over the years is that most of the time, the peer to peer results in the right thing being done for the patient, but
Right.
it oftentimes requires, a physician who has to do a lot of preparation for that call, assisted by lots of people behind the scenes
Hmm.
to be able to make that case to the insurance company.
Hmm.
And so if you can, you know, document as best as possible the objective truth about what happened, hopefully we create a system where over time you have fewer and fewer of those very expensive, frustrating interactions, right? And it's expensive from the payer's perspective as well, right? But we've
Exactly.
got to
Exactly.
have a better way of adjudicating medical necessity. And
Hmm.
that, ultimately to me sounds like something where industry is going to have to come together
Hmm.
and create some solutions, right?
Hmm.
Because, we've been we're not going to have overnight sort of the federal government come to us with a brand new way of running all of the administration of healthcare. It's just not going to happen.
Absolutely.
And when you look at, the societal frustration with the patient experience, it's about this stuff, right?
Hmm.
It's about the fact that there's a lot of things that go wrong in the process that
Hmm.
create a lot of heartache and confusion along the way. And if we imagine eliminating half of those,
Right.
right? And then the next year you try to go eliminate another half of them, right? Like that, I don't think that industry has come together and said that actually is our mission
Right.
together to figure out how to make these processes work better for everyone else. And I don't know whether it's because it feels like a zero sum game between the payer and the provider, but at the end of the day, I think everyone, agrees that we want to pay for services that were, rendered in good faith that were medically
Right.
necessary. And the
Hmm.
faster we get to that answer, I think the better.
Absolutely. So I wanted to ask you about this part about getting to it faster, right? When we met back in May, you talked about how, payers have for the longest time invested in AI technologies, and providers are now sort of beginning to catch up. And I don't know, catch up is the right term or not, but they're getting on board with adopting automation and adopting artificial intelligence. But what I'm seeing is that they are focusing a lot on ambient AI, on clinical documentation. But that's only a piece. I mean, you can't really say, okay, I saved that this many hours in not doing notes because an ambient AI created that note for me. And so I saw this many more patients. You can't really there's no clear ROI in that respect, because that's now how it works from what I understand. It's not like there's so much time is freed up that you're seeing more patients. So the ambient AI pays for itself. That is not the case. So now I'm seeing that AI companies are branching out, like ambient AI companies are branching out. What do you think of this market trend? I mean, you saw this latest news, a bridge, which was in clinical documentation, is now going to do prior authorization with Highmark Health. So I just wanted your opinion on sort of this market trend and where you see true ROI come for providers in their
Yeah.
battle to bone up on artificial intelligence, I guess.
Yeah, I think that great question. So, first of all, what I would say is that I think that the ambient providers are creating a lot of value for their customers, right?
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
and I think that value, I don't know how you know, pencil out in a spreadsheet necessarily the benefit of a more refreshed physician who
True.
doesn't spend as much time in the evening in pajamas doing documentation, right? Like
Correct.
hard
Correct.
to put a
It's
dollar sort of
priceless, actually.
exactly. And so I really admire the work that they're doing. And I think, backing up a little bit, in every other industry, there's room to pay for some delight to make the work, the people who are doing the work have their job simply be better. And I
Mm-hmm.
think, that we're talking about ROI so much in this industry, I think is a reflection of the financial pressures that
True.
health systems have, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've made these huge investments in, IT infrastructure and EHRs, and and they're like, wow, now I need to pay for something
More.
more. And so I think it really just reflects. I think it's unusual that people don't ask what Slack, what we get from ROI on Slack in a lot of
True.
technology companies, for instance. But
True.
I do think that our focus at Smarter is on measurable, calculable return on investment that is tied specifically to revenue and cost. And I think that in a world where there's so much noise, right? So I can't remember a more exciting time in my career regarding sort of the pace of innovation
Mhm.
and just the sheer, volume of companies that appear to be doing very interesting things,
Right.
you know, to cut through the noise. If you're think about it, if you're a health system executive, you're probably getting phone calls every day of the week for, people trying to get a meeting with you.
Right.
you know what do you do? How do you evaluate that? And I
Mm-hmm.
think that, and then and I think it's really having ROI is important because oftentimes executives go out on a limb when they say, look, I really want to bring in this solution, and I'm putting some of my reputation on the line that it's going to be worth it, right?
Right.
And so you know that is why I think it's easier to sell something where it's very easy to understand the value that is being generated from it. And it's sort of sad to me, right, that we can't necessarily, like, I wish there was a little more, like, sort of dollars in the system to also focus on the things that are a little bit, maybe squishier on the ROI front, but
Right.
could make our healthcare system better. And
Mm-hmm.
that's, not work that we do. That's work that a lot of other companies do. But it's not surprising to me that the ambient vendors would take a look at the work that's adjacent to what they're doing and
Yeah.
say, hey, like, it looks like we might be able to have a neat solution to that. It's really hard work, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
if revenue cycle is about paying attention to an unbelievable amount of tiny details, huge variation. And to be a provider in this space, you have to have a very strong focus on service,
Mm-hmm.
because a huge amount of success is going to be had from selling tools. I
Mm-hmm.
think selling outcomes is going to be the best way to cut through a lot of noise in the market.
So you are not bothered by any extra competition that comes from these companies kind of treading into what you guys do on an everyday basis.
Look, I can't predict, like, this is wild, right? Like, who knows what things are going to
Right.
look like 5
Mm-hmm.
years from now? I think the instinct in healthcare to be afraid of competition is
Mm-hmm.
not good, right?
Okay.
And I did a little bit of sabbatical outside of healthcare for a couple of years when I worked as the CTO of Wayfair. And I went from
Mm-hmm.
Athena to Wayfair, and then to Devoted, and then now to Smarter. And there's something unusual when you go into that kind of environment
Mm-hmm.
where literally every single day you're working to understand if the consumer is going to show up.
Right.
And a lot of things become simple in that world, which is the most customer centric businesses win.
True.
And I personally think that, I think in healthcare, there have been, various cases over time where once you get a certain degree of scale, and you see this in enterprise SaaS too, right? Like, you make people buy more than they might want or need. And that, once you achieve a certain amount of scale, it's harder for other innovative solutions to start sort of, making their way through the commercial journey. And so I don't want to, I'm a citizen too, right? And I think we've built a phenomenal team. So
Hmm.
I think competition's good for everybody.
So bring it on, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. You talked about the health system executive who is getting all these calls to say, you buy my technology, or implement my technology within your health system. I have seen some hospitals completely outsource it to Epic. So if you're not on the Epic ecosystem, you're never going to have these people as your customers, right? So I'm curious about the fact that Epic just announced that they are getting into AI charting and they're working with Microsoft. They're going to do, chart navigation and all of that. So this is an example now of a traditional EHR company getting into artificial intelligence and doing a straight up collaboration. Now you meaning Smarter Technologies, also has a relationship with Epic. How does this sort of collaboration impact you guys?
Look, I'm not surprised that anyone isn't thinking about how they improve their products through the
Right.
use of AI.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, from our point of view, we do an immense amount of work on behalf of our clients too, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where it isn't just an act of like writing some software, shipping it, and making it available to customers. And I'm not saying that's not what Epic is necessarily doing either, but there's so much like clinician human in the loop work at the beginning of building a new model. There's a huge amount of labor that goes into truly understanding the revenue cycle and delivering the outcome. And
Mm-hmm.
you need that labor to then train the automation, right? And so I think that there are certain kinds of AI that lend themselves to be, I might call them lighter solutions
Mm-hmm.
within an existing software platform. And so it doesn't surprise me at all, right? That's, if you look at all of enterprise SaaS, like that's what they're doing.
Hmm.
But, we're not selling AI or a feature, right? Like
Right.
of an electronic health record, or we're providing a business service that's around sort of a very quantitative business result. I'm not surprised at all about, and I wasn't in the meeting, so I'm just following along with everybody else. But it wasn't a moment of panic for me, because it seemed like a very rational thing to do. And it is convenient for, customers to have an easy way of integrating, right? And, I
Absolutely.
think as long as the platform stays open, and I believe it will through, all the public APIs, I think that you've seen a lot of penetration within the Epic base of really great cutting edge new solutions, and I don't expect that to stop.
Excellent. And then final question. All these companies are coming into revenue cycle and doing some of the things that you're doing. What are you interested in? What adjacencies are you interested in? What kind of transactions may we see in the future from Smarter Technologies?
Ah, tricky question. I see what you did there. Um, so I'll say a couple things. One is that we have an incredibly capable engineering team within our company, and that was so much of what got me excited about taking on this role, which is that we're rapid product builders ourselves. That said, sometimes you will see on the market new capabilities or a fantastic team that has a domain, set of expertise in something that we don't, or has some sort of proprietary distribution. And I think those are opportunities for us to continue looking at businesses that might be appealing to us, and those are some of the criteria that we might use to evaluate them. But I think the reality is that most companies are always looking to see what's out there in the world and try to understand what it means for their own competitive positioning. So I'm quite certain that we will continue to add companies to the platform, but there's nothing to announce here today.
You got me there. All right, Jeremy, thank you so much for spending some time with us at MedCity Pivot.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.